So, hi everybody. This is Gabe Wilson and I here back to share a little bit about compassionate conversations. And this week specifically, we're going to be talking about the power of setting strong intentions and the difference this can make to our conversations.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well.
Cool. Great. So for anyone who was able to catch us last time, you'll know what's up. But basically, we have a book coming out in just over 2 weeks. The ebook will be released, and then the hard copy will be out in July. And we just thought it'd be a great opportunity to share little aspects of the book, little lenses through which we can see these conversations as a practice, skills that we can improve on over time, and why it's so worthy of our attention. Today, as I said, we're going to be talking about intention. And just to create like shared understanding of what we mean when we say that, I'm going to share a definition that actually comes from Diane Musho Hamilton's first book, Everything is Workable. So a little shout out to this book, which made a huge difference in my life when I was beginning to, really check out like what is it in the conflict resolution work that I wanted to do, what really matters most. And in here, in the chapter on intention, she talks about intention as an internal choice or commitment that guides our actions towards something greater than ourselves. So in that, firstly, to notice that it's an internal choice. It's something that we can choose based on what it is we want to create, how we want to connect, how we want our relationships to flow. And so it's personal in that regard rather than imposed. And what was sort of meaningful to me too in going back over that chapter was this question of what makes the difference between a childlike wishful thinking, some kind of fantasy, just like, oh, I want a pony, or oh, I want an airplane, versus creative self-determination where we're actually really engaged in this process of becoming, and in a way that feels empowering and enlivening, expanding who we are. And the 2 points that she makes in there are, one, staying in touch with reality, being able to receive feedback from the world that we can then use to sort of fine tune and refine how we proceed. And two, practicing the skills and capacities necessary for us to fulfill that intention. Which of course we go into a lot more in the book. What are these skills? What are these capacities? What is it that we're actually seeking to practice here? And, why does that matter? So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say just at the outset. Gabe, do you want to try?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And by the way, Diane also is an essential piece of the book, and so she co-authored it with us. We co-authored with her. And as Kim said, our intention guides our attention. And in the frame of our interpersonal conversations, intention has a very important function of creating common ground, right? So if Kim and I are entering a conversation, we want to explicate at the outset what I, Gabe, have an intention of getting out of this conversation. That gives Kim, one, a way to orient, and then two, more specifically, a conscious choice of whether that intention is something that she's interested in engaging me in. Because if it's a yes, then we're on very solid ground. We're actually starting off in a place of mutuality from that point of view. So not only does it guide our attention, it creates in conversation common ground, right? And oftentimes we just kind of head into conversations without clarity about what we want. So let me just read something from our book on this idea, and then we'll pop back out, have a little back and forth, Kim, and then see if people have questions. All right. So from Having a Clear Intention, the chapter, it's kind of crazy that we're reading from our own book again. Having a clear intention will literally help us navigate our conversations when we encounter difficult terrain. To enter a conversation, other than one that is simply social, without an intention is like walking into the wilderness without a compass. An explicit shared intention serves like a cell membrane for conversations. It includes those who share the intention and excludes those who don't. This is especially important at a time when in many settings, we place a premium on inclusion. We may feel that we need to admit anyone who wants to participate in the conversation, but mixed intentions create mixed results. So maybe I'll just pause there. There are a couple of examples just to flesh out that point, but Kim, I'm wondering if you want to add anything before I share an example.
Oh, go for it.
Go for it. So myself, Kim, and Diane actually led a retreat. And the intention of the retreat was to engage and explore racial dynamics. So there was basically a room of 50% people of color and 50% white people, identified people of color. And the intention was not necessarily to get anyone more woke. It wasn't to teach on what structural oppression was or institutional oppression was, but the intention was to learn how to grow, number one, and two, how to foster deeper connection in the midst of very difficult conversations. Like that was the intention, right? And from that point of view, everyone in that room, Black, white, Asian, didn't matter, should have the desire to grow their interpersonal skills, to deepen their ability to make sense of themselves and of others. And so from that point of view, everyone's responsible for the dynamic in that room. And so there were some people that were totally bought into that intention. They had a very clear desire to grow their interpersonal skills, a clear desire to deepen intimacy in the midst of our differences. And then there were some people where that wasn't true, but they were still drawn to the workshop, but their intention was misaligned. For example, a common one was the assertion that everyone is responsible for the dynamic, for their own role that they're playing in the quality of the relationship. There were a couple of people of color on one occasion, there were two actually, that felt the premise that they're responsible for improving the dynamic between white people and Black people was just one that wasn't congruent with their view that given the pain and the asymmetries of power and also the oppression, historically speaking, that actually a lot of the responsibility lied more on white people to correct. And so from that point of view, it didn't make sense for them to engage. And I just respectfully said that, and this isn't the space for you, right? And so we really clarified their own desires and just redirected them somewhere else. So what ended up being a workshop that was very potent, it was very potent because we created a very clear boundary around what this was about. And if you weren't about that, then you weren't invited to participate. So inclusion and exclusion is really important in the context of having transformative, you could say, if you don't like that word, just meaningful, powerful conversations that will change you. So I'll pause there.
Cool. Thanks, Gabe.
Totally.
Yeah. So I'm thinking at this point, I mean, maybe there's just something I'd like to say about the resistance and the opposites. And yeah, feel free to sort of jump in, Gabe, if you think there's something you want to add. So anytime we set an intention and we create focus on one thing rather than many other things that we could be choosing instead, we can notice what arises in our field of experience, which is actually contrasting with that chosen intention. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when you set a New Year's intention and it's to, I don't know, commit to exercise, you might notice more acutely those days where you really just can't be bothered. And so, you know, there's all kinds of self-talk perhaps that could occur around that, but just the noticing where resistance is arising is in itself very helpful feedback, because it shows us where we're actually not fulfilling with our intention. And that's a necessary part of the process. We don't need to show up as perfect every time. Once we set an intention, it doesn't have to be like, you know, now we're kind of superstars in that domain, but the conscious choosing of it means that as we get pulled off course, particularly in a conversation where you're speaking with real life people with their own emotions and their own stories, their own justifications for the way things are, as we maybe get pulled off course or, you know, engage in other territories, we know where the center point is that we want to bring ourselves back to. Totally. And so I think that the resistance that shows up, or the other like little things that can flicker up, are really part of the process. And what I found in my own experience is that when I enter into a conversation and I verbalize it at the outset, to say, I want to talk to Gabe about something, and I come in and say, hey, Gabe, I'd love to have a conversation with you about something. And I share my intention, which could be maybe I want to understand your point of view about something, or maybe it's I have something specific to share myself, which I'd really love for you to understand, or can you help me problem solve something? If I enter from that point, future me has something to come back to, and I can in a way hold myself accountable to that, and the other person can help share that meaning with me, so that if we're clearly ending up over here in some kind of different dispute about the washing up, we can see that we've gone off track. Yeah, so
Totally. Well, just to compliment, I think in the context of development and growing ourselves, for those that typically are those that are attracted to our kind of book and our kind of work, people that are taking that look at themselves, intention is a way of setting up the conditions for you to take a perspective on yourself, right? And the moment that you can take a perspective on yourself is the moment where you can choose to continue the action, or you can choose a different action, because there's actually a moment of choice. And so, right, even in your own example, if we come into a conversation with the intention of me understanding your perspective, Kim, like I really want, like my intention is to understand your perspective on this. But then you say something that triggers me. And I'm like, wait, hold, what do you mean? And I start to actually push back and start to argue my own perspective. And that's actually falls out of sync with my original intention. And it's precisely that moment of falling out of sync that's gold, from the point of view of taking perspective on yourself and noticing habitual ways of interacting, right? And I might have a habitual way of advocating rather than inquiring. And so intention is basically a mirror that you can use to take a perspective on your actions and whether congruent with your original intention or not. And we'll all fall out of congruency with our intention. That's just human. But to deliberately come back to center, come back to the North Star, is the kind of the exercise of development. And so from that point of view, just to add.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So I'm wondering, we got 8 people live. Hello, everyone. I can't quite tell who you are. The noob over here on tech. But I'm wondering, Kim, if we should throw out some practices and then see if people have questions. And if you have questions, feel free to type them in while we are sharing the practices with you.
Yeah, for sure. So the practice that I sort of have in my mind now, it's pretty simple, and I can sort of break it into 3 parts. The first is, and this would be great if you have anyone watching, if you have a conversation coming up that's meaningful to you, if you have something that you're sort of waiting for to drop, or not to say drop, you're waiting to understand something with someone, you're waiting to receive some feedback, maybe there's something kind of important to your life, this would be a great tool to use in application to that context. But the first step would be to take the time to articulate your intention to yourself before engaging. It's like a preparatory exercise. What is it that you really seek to learn or connect on, or to have expressed through this conversation? Making that clear to yourself before you go in there will be really important. And I think in that regard too, it's important to choose words that are meaningful to you. What feels true in accordance with your value set, and what the direction is you wish to go in. The second step would be to sit with that intention and feel into it and envisage and embody what it would be like to fulfill your intention. Maybe if you're seeking to slow down when you get triggered or heated in a conversation, part of your practice would be to experience a sense of calmness and balanced receptivity in advance of going into that conversation, so you know what that feels like, the texture of it, before engaging. And then the third part is kind of, it's practical. It's like identifying the behaviors that would express that intention. What does that look, what does that sound like? How do you speak when you're coming from that place? And then also imagine the opposite, because of what we said about resistance or noticing when you're falling out of alignment with that intention. what does that look like? Maybe you know what it looks like when you fly off the handle. Maybe you know what it looks like when you shut down and retreat. So have that in your mind too, and you can create like little mini contingency plans for yourself if you know that that's a possibility. So if then statements are a really simple way of doing that. So if I notice that my heart is beating really fast, and if I notice that I'm not able to hear the other person, then I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to ask for a quick timeout. I'm going to remind myself of my intention and maybe share that with the other person so they know what it is I'm really seeking to achieve here. So it's taking the time to articulate your intentions, it's feeling into them, becoming more intimate with them in your felt experience. And 3, it's identifying behaviors and then perhaps little off-track pulls, which you can create little action plans now in advance of going in.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. And by the way, for everyone, I typed in, and Kim, let me know if you see it on your end, but I typed in those 3 steps that Kim just shared with you. So you'll have this available to you in the chat, I believe, after the recording is done. Yeah, I'm wondering if any of you watching live right now do have a question. I don't know if you're on mobile and can't type it in, but if you can, please feel free to ask us any questions. And it can be about interpersonal exchanges in general, or it could be about this inquiry around intention. And if not, we can always just pause here and wish you well and see you next week. I'm also curious what people are thinking about out there, Kim, just in terms of like topics that might be interesting to folks.
Yeah, I would love to know for sure. If anyone watching has something that they want, us to speak to, feel free to reach out to either of us directly, or you can put it into the chat here. Yeah, we'll be doing a few of these going forward as we continue to get word of our book out there. And it'd be really great to be able to, serve our communities and friendship circles directly with what's actually coming up in your lives.
Sweet. Maybe we can pause there.
Okay. Yep.
All right, folks. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kim.
Love. Bye.